cold wind cut through the narrow streets, making the air bite at the skin. She held her little girl close, wrapping her thin arms around her as if her embrace could block the chill. The child's face was pale, lips trembling, eyes wide and tired, her small hands clutched at her mother's side, too weak to even cry. The alien widow had already sold everything, her shoes, her scarf, her only blanket, and even her wedding ring. All gone, piece by piece, just to buy a few scraps of bread each day. Now only one thing was left, the faded, threadbare dress she was wearing. She walked into the crowded market, bare feet scraping against the cold stone ground. The market was loud with the sounds of haggling and shouting, but when people saw her, voices dropped. Some turned away in pity, others watched with curiosity, and a few smiled in ways that made her uneasy. She stepped toward a stall where a fat shopkeeper was weighing fruits. His eyes swept over her and stopped at her dress. He knew exactly why she was there. "I'll take it," he said before she could speak, his voice thick with greed. "It's not worth much, but I'll give you one loaf." "One loaf?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's all I have." "Then you should be happy I'm taking it at all," he sneered. "Do we have a deal or not?" Her little girl's small stomach growled. The sound broke her heart. She glanced around. There was no kindness in any face she saw, no one who would offer her more. Her hands moved slowly to the ties at her shoulder, and the shopkeeper grinned wider. She took off the dress, shivering instantly as the cold air hit her bare skin. She pulled the thin loaf of bread close to her chest and wrapped her arms around herself, trying to cover what she could. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. Some laughed quietly. Others just stared. She didn't care. Her child was more important than her pride. She quickly tore the loaf in half and gave the larger piece to her daughter, watching her chew as if it was the best thing she had ever tasted. But out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. 3 tall figures standing near the edge of the market. Their eyes locked on her, their faces hidden by dark hoods. They had been watching her for a while. She turned away, pulling her daughter with her, and began walking fast. The loaf in her hands felt heavy, not from weight, but from the danger she could sense in the air. The 3 figures started to follow, slow at first, then faster. Her bare feet slapped against the ground as she quickened her pace. She took a sharp turn into a side alley, hoping to lose them. The alley was narrow, lined with old, rusted storage doors, and the shadows were deep. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind her. Her heart pounded, every beat louder than the last. Her daughter clung to her side, frightened, and whispered, "Mama, who are they?" She didn't answer. She didn't dare look back. At the end of the alley, she turned another corner, only to find it was a dead end. Her breath caught in her throat. The wall in front of her was too high to climb, and there was no time to search for another way. The 3 hooded figures stepped into the alley behind her, blocking the exit. One of them laughed softly, a low, ugly sound. "Cold out tonight?" he said. "Need a warm place to stay?" She pulled her daughter behind her, her hands shaking, but her eyes fierce. "Stay away from us," she said, her voice low but steady. "Oh, we don't want to hurt the little one," another said. "We just want to talk with you." They took a step closer. Her back hit the cold wall. Her mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but there was none. She could smell the sour scent of their breath, hear the faint scrape of boots on stone. Then a shadow moved at the far end of the alley. Someone was standing there, tall and broad-shouldered, half hidden in the dark. The hooded men noticed him too. "Move along, stranger," the tallest of them barked. The figure didn't move. Instead, a low voice came from the darkness. "Let them go." The 3 men laughed. "Or what?" one sneered. The stranger stepped forward, and the dim light caught his face. He was not one of their kind. His skin was human, pale under the streetlight, his jaw set in a hard line. His clothes were worn, dusty, and marked with old battle scars. The armor pieces on his shoulders looked dented from fights long past. "You don't want to know what?" he said. One of the thugs lunged toward him, but the human moved faster. His fist slammed into the man's face, sending him crashing into the wall. The other 2 attacked together, but the human ducked, twisted, and struck with precise, brutal force. In seconds, both were on the ground groaning. The human turned to her, his eyes scanning her quickly, then falling on the child clinging to her legs. Without a word, he shrugged off his worn jacket and held it out. "Cover yourself," he said. She hesitated, not trusting him, but the cold bit deep into her skin. She pulled the jacket on, its warmth shocking against her frozen body. "Why are you helping us?" she asked sharply. "They'll be back," he said, glancing at the thugs who were already crawling away. "And they'll bring more." She narrowed her eyes. "We can take care of ourselves." He looked at her for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the alley's exit. "Not tonight, you can't," he muttered. She picked up her daughter and hurried away in the opposite direction, her heart still pounding. But as she turned a corner, she saw him again, leaning casually against a wall, watching her. His eyes were alert, his hand resting on something at his side. He wasn't following her. He was guarding her. The rain started falling just after nightfall, turning the dirt streets into rivers of mud. She hurried along, holding her daughter close under the human's old jacket. Every shadow looked like danger. Every sound made her heart race. She didn't look behind her, but she could feel it. He was still there, walking somewhere in the dark, never too close, never too far. When they reached the edge of the market district, she stopped. "You don't have to follow us," she said, her voice tense. The human stepped into the light of a street lamp, water dripping from his hair. "I'm not following," he said. "I'm making sure you get home alive." She frowned. "Why? You don't even know me." His gaze shifted to her daughter, who was half asleep in her arms. "I've seen this before. People like those men don't stop, not unless someone makes them." She didn't like the sound of that. She didn't trust humans. She had heard stories. Humans were scavengers, fighters, dangerous creatures who lived for chaos. Some called them cursed. Her husband used to say they were trouble. But this one, he didn't look like a drunk soldier or a loud merchant. His eyes were calm, but watchful, and there was something about the way he stood, like he was ready to fight again at any second. They reached the narrow alley that led to her small home. The door was little more than a piece of metal hanging crooked on its frame. The human stopped at the entrance, looking down the alley, then back at her. "If you hear anything tonight," he said slowly, "don't open the door unless it's me." She gave him a hard look. "I can protect my daughter." His mouth tightened. "I hope you can. But they'll be back." She turned away without answering and stepped inside the tiny one-room shack. The roof leaked in two places, and the cold wind slipped in through the gaps in the walls. She laid her daughter on the thin blanket and gave her the last piece of bread from the loaf. The child smiled faintly before drifting to sleep. The sound of rain filled the room. She tried to rest, but her mind kept turning. Who was that man? Why did he care? Maybe he just wanted something from her. Everyone wanted something. Somewhere in the middle of her thoughts, she heard it. Soft footsteps outside. She froze, her hand reaching for the small knife she kept under the bed. The steps stopped just outside the door. Her breath caught in her throat. A low voice came through the cracks in the door. "They found you. Stay quiet." It was him. Her grip on the knife loosened slightly, but before she could move, another sound followed, a deep, rough laugh. Then more footsteps, heavy ones. She could hear voices now, not his. "Inside," a stranger's voice said. She pulled her daughter close and stepped back from the door. The wood creaked. Then, with a sharp crash, it flew inward. Two of the hooded men from before burst into the shack, their boots dripping mud onto the floor. One grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. She slashed at him with the knife, but he twisted her wrist and sent it clattering to the ground. Before she could scream, the human appeared in the doorway like a shadow breaking through the storm. His fist connected with the first thug's jaw so hard that the man collapsed instantly. The second one pulled a blade, but the human caught his wrist, slammed him against the wall, and drove his knee into the man's stomach. The attacker crumpled to the floor, groaning. "Come on," the human said sharply. He grabbed her hand, not roughly but firmly, and pulled her toward the back of the shack. She hesitated for a split second, then scooped up her daughter and followed. They ran out into the rain, their feet splashing through muddy puddles. She didn't know where he was leading her, but she could hear more shouting behind them. The alley twisted and turned until they reached a section of the city she had never been to before. There, an old storage building stood abandoned, its doors hanging open. He led her inside and pushed the door shut behind them. The air smelled of dust and old wood. In one corner, he knelt down and pulled a small metal box from his pack. A moment later, a soft flame flickered to life. "Stay here," he said, setting the fire in an old metal barrel. The warm light filled the space, making the shadows less threatening. She knelt beside her daughter, tucking the jacket around her to keep her warm. "You're insane," she said quietly. "You could have been killed." "So could you," he replied without looking up. He was checking a long, thin blade, cleaning it with a cloth. The metal caught the firelight, and she saw faint scratches across its surface, signs of many fights before this night. As she watched him, her eyes moved to the side of his neck. There was a scar there, a deep one, like a blade had once nearly taken his life. She had seen scars like that before, on soldiers returning from the front lines of the war. The sight made something twist in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. His hands kept moving, calm and precise. Finally, he said, "Someone who's tired of seeing the same thing happen to people who can't fight back." She studied him for a moment longer, then looked at her sleeping child. The girl's breathing was slow and steady now, her face relaxed for the first time in days. The rain outside grew heavier, pounding on the roof of the storage building. Somewhere in the distance, voices called out in anger, but they were far away. For now, they were safe. Still, she knew it wouldn't last. The storm raged outside, wind howling against the thin walls of the storage building. The fire inside the barrel flickered and hissed as raindrops leaked through cracks in the roof. She sat close to her daughter, who was curled up under the human's jacket, her tiny breaths warm against her chest. The human sat a few feet away, silent, sharpening the blade in his hands. The sound of the metal scraping made the air feel tense. A sudden noise came from outside, boots splashing in water, voices low and sharp. She stiffened, her arms tightening around her daughter. The human raised a hand, telling her to stay quiet. His head turned toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. The voices drew closer. One of them laughed, the same cruel laugh she had heard in the alley. The human stood, moving toward the door like a predator stalking prey. When the first thug's shadow appeared, the human was already in motion. The door swung open, and two men rushed inside, weapons drawn. The fight was quick but brutal. The human dodged the first swing, grabbed the man's arm, and slammed him into the wall. The second came at him with a knife, but the human caught his wrist, twisted, and drove his elbow into the attacker's face. Blood splattered on the floor. Both men went down groaning. "We can't stay here," he said firmly, already grabbing his pack. She hesitated, not wanting to move her sleeping daughter, but his tone left no room for argument. He helped her lift the girl, wrapping the jacket tighter around her small body. They slipped out into the rain again, moving fast through the maze of dark streets. The human kept to the shadows, avoiding the main roads. He seemed to know exactly where to step, exactly when to pause and listen. She followed close behind, her bare feet numb from the cold, her heart racing with every sound. Finally, they reached a small, abandoned house at the edge of the city. The door was locked, but the human broke it open with one strong kick. Inside, the air smelled musty, but it was dry. He set her daughter on an old couch and lit another small fire in a cracked fireplace. "Why are they after me?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "They're not after you," he said, sitting down across from her. "They're after what they think you still have." She gave a bitter laugh. "I have nothing. They don't believe that. They think you're hiding something. Money, valuables, maybe something your husband left behind." Her stomach tightened. "My husband had nothing but debts. That's all they'll get from me." He leaned back, his eyes studying her. "Then they'll take you instead. People like that don't stop until they get what they want, and if they can't get money, they take flesh." Her blood ran cold. She pulled her daughter closer. "I can handle myself." He shook his head. "Ha, not against them. They'll come in numbers next time." She stared at him for a long moment. "Why do you care? You could walk away right now, and this wouldn't be your problem." He looked into the fire, his jaw tightening. "Because I've seen this before. I've seen women and children left to fend for themselves while everyone else turns their back. And I didn't do enough back then. I'm not making that mistake again." The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. She didn't know what to say. He didn't seem like the kind of man who wanted thanks, and she still didn't trust him completely. But she couldn't deny that without him, she might already be dead. After a while, she noticed the scar on his neck again, the jagged mark running from just under his ear to his collarbone. It wasn't a wound from a street fight. It was deeper, older, the kind that came from war. She remembered seeing scars like that on soldiers who came back broken, carrying ghosts in their eyes. "Were you in the war?" she asked quietly. His eyes lifted to hers. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he nodded once. "I was on your planet during the occupation." Her body went stiff. "You were one of them?" "One of the soldiers, yes," he said, "but not one of the ones who burned villages or dragged people away. I was there when your people fought back. I saw what was done to them, and I left before I became like the others." She didn't know if she believed him, but his voice carried a weight that didn't sound like a lie. There was no pride in his tone, only regret. Before she could reply, a distant noise broke through the sound of the storm, an explosion, far away but strong enough to make the ground tremble slightly. She looked toward the window, but the human was already on his feet, peering out into the darkness. "They're moving fast," he muttered. "Someone lit up the east side. That's close to the market." Her stomach nodded. "That's near my home." He turned to her sharply. "You can't go back. There's nothing there for you now. If they've burned it, it's because they're making sure you have no place to hide." She felt the weight of his words sink into her chest. Her home was gone. The little life she had clung to was over. The human picked up his pack again. "We'll move at first light. They won't stop hunting you unless someone makes them." She looked at her sleeping daughter and then at him. Something told her that he was about to do something dangerous, something that might cost him his life. And for the first time since she had met him, she was afraid for him too. The fire in the old fireplace had burned down to glowing embers, filling the room with a faint orange light. She sat on the couch with her daughter in her arms, watching the human as he cleaned his weapon again. His movements were slow, careful, like he was thinking hard about something. Finally, he spoke. "Those men aren't just common thieves. They work for someone dangerous." She shifted uncomfortably. "I already know who they work for," she said quietly. "The one they call the Collector." The human's eyes lifted to hers. "You owe him money?" Her lips pressed together before she answered. "My husband borrowed from him when our daughter was sick. Medicine was too expensive, and no one would lend to us. He promised he would pay it back after the harvest." She paused, her voice shaking. "But my husband never came back from the war, and the debt became mine." "How much?" he asked. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Too much. I could work for 10 years and still not pay it." The human leaned back, his face unreadable. "If it's just money, I can make the debt disappear." She laughed bitterly. "Disappear? No one makes the Collector forget a debt." "I've done it before," he said, his voice steady. "But it's dangerous. If I do this, there's no going back. He'll know someone came for him. He'll know it was me." She shook her head. "No, I don't want more blood spilled for me." He didn't argue. He simply stared at the fire for a long time. Then he said, "If you don't stop him, he will take you. And when he can't break you, he'll take your daughter instead." Her breath caught, and her arms tightened around the little girl. She hated that he was right. The Collector never stopped until he got what he wanted. Still, she couldn't bring herself to agree. The rest of the night was quiet, except for the rain. She stayed awake long after the human stretched out in the chair, resting his eyes but never truly sleeping. At some point, she must have drifted off, because when she woke, the chair was empty. Her heart jumped. She looked around quickly. Her daughter was still sleeping beside her, wrapped in the jacket. The human's pack was gone. She rushed to the doorway, the cold morning air biting at her skin. The streets were empty, but in the distance she heard sharp cracks, gunfire. Her chest tightened. She knew exactly where he had gone. She wanted to tell herself he was just scouting, but deep inside, she knew better. He had gone to face the Collector. Alone. Every passing minute felt like an hour. She kept pacing the room, her eyes darting to the door every time she heard a noise outside. At one point, she thought she heard shouting and the sound of something breaking far away. Then, silence. The waiting was torture. She thought of the scar on his neck, the way he moved like a man who had seen too many battles. Maybe this was what he wanted, to end it once and for all. But what if he didn't come back? She didn't even know his name. Time dragged on until the first light of dawn began to slip through the broken window. Then she heard it. Footsteps outside, slow and uneven. She grabbed the knife from the table and stepped to the door, her breath held tight in her chest. When the door opened, it was him. His face was pale, his hair damp with sweat, and blood stained his sleeve. In his hand was a small, worn leather bag. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy clink. She stared at it. "What is that?" "Enough to pay for food, medicine, and a roof over your head for months," he said, his voice rough. Her eyes went from the bag to his arm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, moving to sit down heavily in the chair. "They won't bother you again." She stepped closer, her voice low. "What did you do?" His gaze met hers, steady but dark. "I made sure they couldn't." She could see his hands shaking, not from fear, but from something deeper, a quiet rage that hadn't cooled yet. She set the knife aside and pulled out a rag to clean the blood from his arm. As she worked, she caught a glimpse of his knuckles, raw and bruised. There were deep cuts along his forearm. These weren't the marks of a clean fight. They were the signs of someone who had been in the middle of chaos, surrounded by violence. Outside, the city was waking up, but she barely noticed. The sound of a distant explosion rumbled through the air, making the ground tremble for a moment. She glanced at him. His eyes had hardened again. "This isn't over," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. A shiver went through her. She didn't know if he meant the collector's men or something else entirely. All she knew was that the man sitting across from her had just risked everything for her and her daughter. And she wasn't sure why. The morning light spilled weakly through the broken window, casting pale shapes on the floor. He sat slouched in the chair, his head tilted back, eyes half closed. She could see the exhaustion in the lines of his face, the dirt and blood that streaked his skin. His sleeve was still soaked where the wound had bled through. She set a pot of water over the small fire in the fireplace, the smell of smoke filling the room. Her daughter stirred on the couch, rubbing her eyes and sitting up. "Mama?" she whispered. "Shh," she said softly, brushing the child's hair back. "Go back to sleep." But the little girl was watching the human, curiosity in her tired eyes. When the water was ready, she took a cloth and knelt beside him. "Let me see your arm," she said. "It's fine," he muttered, but when she reached for his sleeve, he didn't pull away. She peeled the fabric back, revealing the gash. It wasn't deep enough to be deadly, but it was ugly, swollen, and already bruising around the edges. She cleaned it with warm water, her movements gentle but firm. He didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "I did," he replied. No one else was going to stop them. Her hands paused for a moment. "And now? Now that they're gone?" "They're not all gone," he said, opening his eyes and meeting hers. "The ones who survive will run back to the collector, and when he hears, he'll come himself." She felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. "Then what you did last night? It wasn't the end." "No," he said simply. "It was just the first move." She tied the cloth around his arm, then sat back, watching him. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk yourself for someone you don't even know?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I've been where you are, hungry, hunted, watching people you care about get taken because you can't fight back." He looked at her daughter for a moment before continuing. "I've seen what happens when no one steps in." She didn't reply. The truth was, she still didn't trust him completely, but she couldn't deny the simple fact. He had saved her, not once, but twice. The little girl climbed off the couch and padded over to him. She reached out and touched the cloth wrapped around his arm. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Not much." She looked up at her mother. "Can we give him some bread?" They had only a small piece left, but the widow nodded. The girl ran to get it, holding it out with both hands. He accepted it like it was a gift of gold, breaking it in half and giving the bigger piece back to her. The moment felt almost peaceful, but it didn't last. A low rumble rolled through the air, not thunder, something else. The human's eyes shifted toward the window. "That's an explosion," he said, his voice flat. She felt her stomach tighten. "Here?" "Not yet, but it's close enough." He stood and walked to the door, glancing outside. The streets were mostly empty, but smoke curled in the distance. "They're moving in." She went to him. "We can't run forever. Where would we even go?" "Somewhere they can't follow," he said without looking at her. "And if I say no?" He turned to face her. Then you'll be dead within a week or worse. The words were cold, but there was no cruelty in them. Only fact. She didn't want to believe him, but she could hear the truth in his voice. The collector's reach was long, and once he marked someone, there was no safety unless the threat was gone for good. "What did you do last night?" she asked again. He was silent for a moment. "I took something from him," he said finally. "Something worth more to him than all the money you owed." Her eyes narrowed. "And that will make him angrier." "Yes." She almost laughed at the madness of it. "So you've made sure he won't rest until he finds us." "I've made sure he'll have to come to me," he said. "And when he does, I'll end it." There was something in his voice that sent a shiver through her. Not just confidence, certainty. He believed what he was saying, and somehow that made her believe it too. The rest of the morning passed in uneasy silence. He worked on repairing one of the knives he carried, sharpening the edge until it gleamed. She packed what little food and water they had into a small bag, though she still didn't know if she would agree to leave with him. When midday came, the streets outside were no longer quiet. Voices called out, boots pounded against the ground, and the sound of wagons rattling over the cobblestones echoed from the main road. The human stood at the window, his eyes tracking every movement. "They're searching house by house," he said. Her breath caught. "Then they'll find us." "Not if we move now." She looked at her daughter, who was playing quietly with a small wooden doll, unaware of the danger. The thought of dragging her out into the cold again made her heart ache, but the thought of what would happen if the collector's men found them was worse. Finally, she nodded. "All right. We go." He didn't waste time. He slung his pack over his shoulder, adjusted the strap of his weapon, and opened the door. "Stay close to me. No matter what you hear, don't stop moving." She took her daughter's hand, gripping it tightly, and stepped out into the narrow street. The air smelled of smoke, and in the distance, a bell was ringing, a warning. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that whatever was coming next would decide all their fates. The air outside was sharp with the smell of smoke. In the distance, black clouds rose from the market district, twisting upward into the gray sky. People hurried through the streets, some carrying bundles, others dragging carts piled with whatever they could save. No one looked at them for more than a second. Everyone had their own troubles. He walked ahead, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. She kept her daughter close, clutching her small hand so tightly the girl winced. "Sorry," she whispered, loosening her grip, but she didn't let go. They stayed away from the main road, weaving through back alleys. The ground here was slick with mud, and broken crates and trash were scattered everywhere. A dog barked somewhere far away, followed by a sharp shout. She could feel tension in the air, like the whole city was holding its breath. He stopped suddenly and held up his hand. She froze. Ahead, two men in black armor stood at the mouth of the alley, their helmets reflecting the pale light. They were searching door to door, forcing people outside, questioning them. The collector's soldiers. Without a word, he led them into a side passage so narrow she had to turn sideways to fit through. They came out behind a row of old warehouses. Most of the windows were broken, the walls streaked with years of dirt. He pushed open a door and motioned for them to go inside. The building was empty except for dust and the smell of rust. He shut the door quietly and leaned against it, listening. "They're spreading out," he said in a low voice. "The boss is here." Her stomach tightened. "Here? In the city?" "Yes. He wouldn't send this many men unless he came himself." She sank onto a wooden crate, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "We should hide until they leave." He shook his head. "They won't leave. Not until they have you." She felt heat rise in her chest, fear mixed with anger. "Then what do you suggest? Run forever?" "No," he said simply. "We get you out of the city before they close the gates." She wanted to argue, but she could see the truth in his eyes. Once the gates were shut, they would be trapped. They waited inside the warehouse for the soldiers to move farther down the street. Then he opened the back door, and they slipped out into another alley. From here, they could see the high walls of the city in the distance. But between them and safety was a stretch of open ground, and soldiers patrolling it. They moved quickly, keeping low. Every time a patrol passed, they ducked behind carts, piles of barrels, or into doorways. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the soldiers would hear it. Halfway to the gates, a shout rang out. Someone had spotted them. "Run!" he barked, grabbing her daughter and swinging her up into his arms. He didn't slow down, his boots pounding against the ground as they raced through the open space. She ran beside him, her breath burning in her chest. Arrows hissed through the air, one striking the wall inches from her head. The soldiers were shouting now, chasing them. She stumbled once, almost falling, but he caught her arm and yanked her forward without breaking stride. They reached a cluster of abandoned wagons and dove behind them. He set the girl down gently, then pulled a small, battered pistol from his belt. She had never seen one this close before. It was old, scratched, but still deadly. "They're closing in," she whispered. "I know," he said. "When I tell you, take her and run for the gate. Don't look back." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." She wanted to protest, but the sound of boots pounding closer cut her off. He leaned out from behind the wagon and fired. The sharp crack of the shot echoed in the air, and one of the soldiers went down. The others hesitated just long enough for him to grab her arm. "Now!" They ran again, the gates looming larger with every step. 2 guards stood there, but they were distracted by the chaos behind them. She and her daughter slipped past, and she turned just in time to see him coming through, firing once more before kicking the heavy wooden door shut behind them. They didn't stop running until they were deep into the fields beyond the city. The tall grass bent under the wind, hiding them from sight. Only when they reached a small hill did they slow down. She dropped to her knees, gasping for air, while her daughter clung to her side. He stood a few steps away, scanning the horizon. "We're clear for now," he said. She looked back toward the city. Smoke still rose into the sky, and the faint sound of shouting carried on the wind. "You were right," she admitted reluctantly. They wouldn't have stopped. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "No, and they still won't. Not until I end this." The words sent a chill through her, but there was something else too, something like hope. She followed his gaze toward the distant hills. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere I know, a place they can't follow easily, but it's far, and the road won't be safe." She nodded slowly, holding her daughter tighter. For the first time, she realized that her life, what was left of it, was now tied to his. And whatever came next, there was no turning back. The wind in the open fields was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of smoke from the burning city behind them. She kept glancing back, half expecting to see black-armored soldiers running through the grass after them. But there was nothing, only the swaying stalks under the gray sky. He moved ahead with quick, steady steps, scanning the horizon every few seconds. Her daughter clung to her side, tired but silent. Each step away from the city felt like a small piece of safety, yet her chest remained tight. She knew the collector was still out there, and men like him didn't give up. By midday, they reached a small river. The water was fast and cold, rushing over smooth stones. He crouched, filled a dented flask, and drank before handing it to her. She sipped carefully, letting the chill run down her throat. Her daughter drank next, smiling faintly for the first time in days. "Not far now," he said. "We'll rest at an old trader's post. No, it's hidden in the hills." They followed the river upstream, the ground growing rockier beneath their feet. For a while, the only sounds were the wind and the water. But then, faint at first, came the steady thump of hooves. He froze. "They're here," he murmured. Her heart leapt. She could see it too now, dark figures on horseback moving fast across the open ground behind them. The collector's riders. "Run," he ordered. He grabbed her daughter and sprinted along the riverbank. She ran after him, lungs burning, legs aching. The riders shouted, closing the distance. An arrow zipped past her shoulder, splashing into the river. Up ahead, the land sloped upward into a narrow pass between 2 steep hills. He dashed for it, pulling them into the shadows of the rock walls. The sound of the horses grew louder. He set the girl down and turned to her. "Keep running until you see the post. Don't stop, no matter what." She grabbed his arm. "What are you going to do?" "Slow them down," he said simply, pulling the small pistol from his belt and checking the bullets. Her throat tightened. "You can't fight them all." His eyes met hers. "I don't need to. Just long enough for you to get away." Before she could speak again, the riders were on them. He shoved her toward the path and stepped into the open, firing once. One horse reared, throwing its rider into the dirt. The others charged. She ran, her daughter's hand in hers, heart pounding with each echo of gunfire behind them. The narrow pass twisted, and she couldn't see him anymore. The shouts of the riders mixed with the sharp cracks of his weapon, then with the harsh clash of steel. She wanted to turn back, but her daughter's terrified eyes forced her forward. Finally, she spotted a structure half hidden under an overhang of rock, a small, weathered building with boarded windows. She pushed the door open and pulled her daughter inside. The room smelled of dust and old wood. There were shelves with broken tools, a table missing one leg, and a cold fireplace. She barred the door with a thick piece of timber, then pressed her ear against it. The noise outside was faint now. Distant shouts, one final gunshot, then silence. Her stomach twisted. She didn't know if that silence meant he was alive or dead. Minutes crawled by like hours. Then, just as her fear began to crush her, there was a knock at the door. 3 quick taps. She rushed to open it. He stood there, breathing hard, a fresh cut across his cheek, his shirt torn. Blood dripped from his knuckles, but his eyes were steady. "We have to keep moving," he said, stepping inside. She stared at him in disbelief. "How?" "They won't be following anymore," he said, his tone flat, giving no details. They rested only long enough to eat a few mouthfuls of dried meat from a dusty crate in the corner. Then he led them up a hidden path that climbed high into the hills. The air grew colder, but the view widened. She could see the fields stretching for miles, the burning city now just a faint smear of smoke on the horizon. By the time the sun began to set, the path ended at a plateau. There, built into the rock itself, was a small stone shelter. The door was reinforced with metal, and a single chimney sent a thin wisp of smoke into the air. "This is it," he said, pushing the door open. Inside was a single room with thick walls, a sturdy table, and a bed in the corner. It was warm from the small fire already burning in the hearth. She set her daughter down on the bed, tucking the human's jacket around her. The girl fell asleep almost instantly. The human stood by the fire, staring into the flames. She stepped closer. "It's over now?" His eyes didn't leave the fire. "No, the collector will come for me, but he won't find you here." She searched his face. "And what about you?" He finally looked at her. "I'll deal with him when he comes." Her voice dropped. "Why do you keep risking your life for us?" He was silent for a long moment, then said, "Because I've lost too many people I could have saved. I'm not making that mistake again." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. She wanted to say more, but the fire's warmth was lulling her, and exhaustion pressed down like a heavy blanket. Before sleep claimed her, she looked at him one last time. He was still standing guard, still watching the door, as if ready for a fight that hadn't yet come. And for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because she knew he would face it for her.